The chamber stretched wider than most planetary capitals, its walls made of something that wasn't quite metal and wasn't quite stone. 847 species had sent their representatives to Seven, the neutral station that floated in the space between territories, belonging to no one and serving everyone. Today, they had all come for one purpose: to decide what to do about humanity. Ambassador sat in the defendant's circle, a small platform that rose from the floor like an island in a sea of alien faces. Some of those faces had eyes. Some didn't. Some breathed oxygen like he did. Others existed in sealed environment suits filled with methane or liquid ammonia or pure thought given form. He had been part of the galactic community for 6 years now, ever since Earth made first contact, and he still couldn't identify half the species in this room. Chief Arbiter called the session to order. The Arbiter looked like a mantis made of silver wire and starlight, standing 3 meters tall on legs that bent in too many places. When it spoke, the words came through the translation implant in its ear, flat and precise. We gather to address case number 3,847,291, the human problem. The evidence has been reviewed. We will now hear testimony. Shifted in his seat. The human problem. 30 years since first contact, and that's what they called his species. Not the human contribution or the human question. The human problem. The Queen came forward first. She moved on 16 legs, her chitinous body gleaming under the chamber's lights. Her species had ruled a quarter of the western spiral arm for 10,000 years, and she looked every bit the ancient power she represented. 3 months ago, the Queen began, her mandibles clicking in agitation, one of your diplomats prevented a war that my people had been preparing for a century. The collective had insulted our honor, killed our colonies, and spat on our treaties. We were ready. We had the ships, the soldiers, the righteous anger of a wounded civilization. Remembered, Sarah had been the diplomat's name. Young, idealistic, probably too empathetic for her own good. Your human sat at the negotiation table for 12 hours, the Queen continued. She did not offer us territory. She did not promise us wealth or power. She did not even argue about who was right or wrong. She simply talked about loss, about the mothers on both sides who would weep, about the children who would grow up without parents, about the emptiness that victory leaves behind. The Queen's voice wavered, and that sent a ripple through the chamber. That didn't show weakness, ever. She made me cry, the Queen said. I cried. Do you understand what that means? My species abandoned emotional displays 2,000 years ago. We are a hive-mind civilization. We do not feel as individuals. And yet this human woman reached into something I didn't know I had and pulled out tears I didn't know I could shed. By the end of that 12 hours, both sides had signed a peace treaty. Not because of logic, not because of benefit. Because she made us feel something we had forgotten we could feel. The Queen's claws scraped against the floor. That is not diplomacy, that is a weapon. The High Commander next. He was a humanoid at least, which made him easier for to read. His skin had a faint blue tint, and his eyes were solid black, but his body language spoke of military precision and controlled fury. One of your artists held an exhibition on our capital world, the commander said. The theme was grief. Paintings, sculptures, music, all centered on human loss and sorrow. Within a week, 40,000 had committed themselves to psychiatric facilities. Within a month, our productivity dropped by 30%. Within 2 months, our entire cultural paradigm began to shift. He pulled up a holographic display. We are a logical species. We make decisions based on efficiency and outcome. We had eliminated grief from our society through genetic modification 800 years ago. We saw no purpose in dwelling on the irreversible. And then your artist showed us what we had lost. She showed us that grief wasn't weakness, that remembering the dead wasn't inefficient, that pain had a purpose. The commander's hands clenched. Our young are now demanding the return of emotional capacity. Our government is destabilizing. Our military efficiency has dropped by 18% because soldiers keep stopping to comfort each other instead of maintaining focus. You have broken something in us, and we don't know if we can put it back together." More testimonies followed. A scientist described a human child's tantrum in a marketplace that somehow inspired political revolution on 3 nearby worlds. A merchant explained how human laughter had caused a mass awakening in his emotionally suppressed species, leading to what they called the feeling riots. A Delphini philosopher spoke in horrified fascination about how human love seemed to create quantum entanglement between unrelated beings. Each testimony built the case. Human emotions were infectious. They spread across species barriers that should have been impossible to cross. They bypassed evolutionary psychology, ignored genetic programming, and somehow rewrote the fundamental operating systems of civilizations that had been stable for. Finally, Chief Arbiter spoke again. "Ambassador, do you wish to offer defense?" Stood, he had prepared speeches. He had data and arguments and carefully constructed logic. But as he looked around the chamber at hundreds of species who feared what he felt every day, the speeches seemed pointless. "I don't know what to tell you," he said. "We're emotional, we always have been. We tried to suppress it back in our history, tried to be purely logical. It didn't work. Emotions are part of what makes us human. We love, we hate, we grieve, we hope, we rage, we forgive. Sometimes all in the same day. It's messy and complicated, and yes, it's powerful. But it's also what kept us alive through ice ages and wars and plagues and all the thousands of ways our own planet tried to kill us." He gestured around the chamber. "You call it a weapon, we call it being alive." The arbiter's wire-frame body remained still. "The tribunal will deliberate." They deliberated for 6 hours. Sat in his circle, watching the representatives argue in clusters, their translation fields overlapping into an incomprehensible babble. He could feel the fear in the room, a palpable thing that pressed against his skin. They were genuinely terrified of him, of his species. Not because humans were strong or advanced or aggressive, but because they felt things. When the tribunal reconvened, Chief Arbiter stood at the center of the chamber. The light seemed to dim around it, as if reality itself was holding its breath. "The tribunal has reached a verdict," the arbiter said. "After reviewing all evidence and testimony, we find that human emotions constitute a Class IX existential threat. They are unpredictable, they spread without consent, and they fundamentally alter the societies they touch. By the authority of the Galactic Concordance, we classify human emotions as weapons of the highest danger category." Felt his stomach drop. Class IX. That was the category for planet-killing weapons, for self-replicating AI, for technologies that could end civilizations. "Humanity is hereby given 2 options," the arbiter continued. "Option 1. Submit to mandatory emotional suppression therapy for your entire species. The process is painless and reversible, should the tribunal ever deem it safe to restore your emotional capacity. Option 2. Accept permanent quarantine within your home system. No human will be permitted to leave, and no alien will be permitted to enter until such time as the tribunal determines the threat has been contained or neutralized." The chamber fell silent, could hear his own heartbeat loud in his ears. "You have 72 hours to consult with your government and provide your response," the arbiter said. "This session is adjourned." As the representatives began to file out, remained in his circle. Around him, he could hear the whispers, the relief, the fear still present but now mixed with satisfaction. They had solved the human problem. They had found a way to make the galaxy safe again. Thought about Sarah, crying with the Queen. He thought about the artist who had shown the what grief meant. He thought about humanity, messy and emotional and complicated, about to be given a choice between losing themselves or losing the stars. He thought about what his answer would be, and he knew that the next 72 hours would determine not just humanity's fate, but perhaps the fate of every species that had ever wondered if feeling something was worth the cost. The chamber emptied. Sat alone in his circle, surrounded by the vast space that suddenly felt like a prison. Outside the windows, stars burned in the endless dark, beautiful and cold and utterly indifferent to the decisions being made in their light. He stood up slowly, his mind already working. They wanted an answer in 72 hours. Well, he would give them an answer, just not the one they expected. Didn't call Earth. He didn't consult with the government or military strategists or alien psychologists. Instead, he sent messages to every human on 7. There were 43 of them, scattered throughout the station. Diplomats, scientists, engineers, even a few tourists who had come to see the famous neutral ground of galactic civilization. His message was simple: I'm throwing a party tomorrow night. Observation Deck 7, bring yourselves. The Tribunal's Security Council spent 4 hours analyzing that message. They scanned it for hidden codes, ran it through threat assessment programs, and finally brought it to Chief Arbiter. A party, the Arbiter asked. We believe it's a human social gathering, the security chief said. He was a species that looked like animated obsidian. Purpose unclear, threat level unknown. Is he requesting weapons, resources, access to restricted areas? No, Arbiter. He's requesting permission to use a public space and inviting other humans to join him. He's also invited representatives from every species present at the tribunal. The Arbiter's wireframe body hummed. Invited our representatives, to what purpose? Unknown, but Ambassador specifically requested that those who against humanity attend. The Queen, the High Commander, the scientist, all of them. The Security Council debated for another hour. Was this a threat? A final act of defiance? Some kind of emotional attack? But they couldn't find any violation of station protocols. Was allowed to request use of public spaces. He was allowed to socialize. And technically, he was still an ambassador with diplomatic privileges, at least until humanity gave their official response. Approve it, the Arbiter finally said. But triple security. I want sensors on every emotional frequency. If the humans attempt to weaponize their feelings, I want to know immediately. The next evening, Observation Deck 7 filled with beings from across the galaxy. Some came out of curiosity. Some came to observe the humans one last time before they were suppressed or quarantined. Some came because they had nothing better to do on a neutral station in the middle of nowhere. The Queen came because she couldn't explain why she wanted to, even to herself. The deck was one of the station's largest open spaces, a vast room with a transparent dome that looked out onto a nebula. Clouds of gas and dust glowed in shades of purple and gold, backlit by newborn stars. It was beautiful in the cold, distant way that space was always beautiful. The humans had transformed it. Music played from speakers scattered around the room, but not the synthesized tones that most species used. This was organic, made by instruments and voices, full of imperfections and warmth. Tables held food that smelled strange and inviting, dishes from dozens of Earth cultures arranged in colorful displays. Humans moved through the crowd, not maintaining formal diplomatic distance but actually approaching aliens, smiling, talking, laughing. An elderly human woman spotted a group of standing awkwardly near the wall. The were, with delicate wings and compound eyes, a species that processed information at 3 times human speed and found most other beings impossibly slow. The woman walked up to them without hesitation. You look like you need to dance, she said through her translator. The leader's antennae twitched in confusion. We do not understand the purpose of rhythmic movement. Then you're about to learn, the woman said, and she took this claw in her weathered hand. What followed this processing speed? The old woman moved slowly, patiently, showing them how to sway to the music. She laughed when they stumbled, not mockingly but with genuine delight. She encouraged them, praised their attempts, and somehow, impossibly, made the act of moving in synchronization feel meaningful. They found themselves laughing. The sound came out through their translation fields as clicking chirps, but it was laughter. They were laughing. A species that had eliminated humor as inefficient was laughing in the arms of a human grandmother. Across the room, a human veteran sat with a crystalline being from the collective. There were energy-based life forms, beings of pure light who had never known physical sensation, never felt pain or pleasure or loss in any way that translated to material existence. The veteran, a man named Thomas with scars on his hands and shadows in his eyes, spoke quietly about war. Not the glorious parts or the strategic parts, but the true parts. The friends who didn't come home. The weight of survival when others fell. The way memory could be both burden and gift. The being listened, their light pulsing in patterns that showed attention, processing, something like confusion. They had existed for 3,000 years. They had witnessed civilizations rise and fall, but they had never understood loss because they had never understood attachment. "Why do you carry these memories?" they asked. "Your species has the technology to remove painful recollections. Why choose to suffer?" Thomas looked at his hands. "Because forgetting them would mean they didn't matter, and they mattered. The people I lost mattered. The pain means they were real." This light flickered in a way their species hadn't experienced before. Something shifted in their quantum structure, a resonance they couldn't name. Later, when they returned to their collective, they would try to explain what happened. They would fail, but they would never be quite the same. The High Commander stood near the food tables, maintaining his military posture, observing the chaos with analytical precision. A human child approached him, no more than 7 years old, with dark skin and braided hair and eyes that held no fear of the alien warrior. She held up a piece of paper. "I made this for you." The commander looked down at the drawing. It showed him, rendered in crayon with the artistic skill of a child but surprising attention to detail. In the drawing, he was smiling. His solid black eyes had been given pupils and warmth. He looked happy. "Why did you create this?" he asked. The girl shrugged. "You looked sad. I wanted you to see what you'd look like if you weren't." The commander stared at the drawing. His species had eliminated facial expressions along with emotions. They had no word for smile. But looking at this piece of paper, this simple gesture from a child who didn't know him, he felt something crack in his chest. He wanted to be the person in this drawing. He wanted to be capable of that expression. "Thank you," he said, and his voice carried a weight that made his own soldiers, watching from across the room, exchange startled glances. Their commander had never thanked anyone before. The party continued for hours. A human musician played a guitar, singing a song about his sister who had died young. The scientist who had against humanity found himself weeping, actual tears running down his face for the first time in his genetically modified life. The song spoke of love and loss and the beauty of having someone to grieve, and the scientist understood, finally, what his species had given up in the name of efficiency. Chief Arbiter arrived at midnight, drawn by reports that were becoming increasingly concerning. The security sensors showed emotional frequencies spiking across species that shouldn't have been capable of those responses. Representatives were behaving erratically, abandoning protocol, engaging in inefficient social bonding. The Arbiter found standing near the observation windows, looking out at the nebula. "What have you done?" the Arbiter asked. Turned, his eyes were tired but clear. "I showed them what they were afraid of." "You've weaponized your emotions. You've deployed them against this gathering." "No," said. "I invited people to a party. They came. They chose to be here. Everything that happened because they wanted it to happen, because somewhere deep down maybe they were tired of being alone." The Arbiter's wireframe body hummed with agitation. "You've contaminated them. The Queen has been engaging in what she calls nest warmth with 17 different species. The Commander has spent an hour discussing feelings with your child. The scientist has cried 4 times. This is exactly what we feared." Is it? Asked. He gestured around the room. Look at them, really look. Are they suffering? Are they being harmed? Or are they just feeling things they'd forgotten they could feel? That's the danger, the arbiter said. Once felt, emotions cannot be unfelt. You've changed them without their consent. They consented when they walked through that door, said. They could leave any time, but they're staying. Not because I'm forcing them, because maybe, just maybe, connection is worth the risk. The arbiter fell silent. Around them, the party continued. An engineer from Earth taught a group of methane breathers how to play a card game. Two diplomats debated philosophy with a hive-mind entity, all of them laughing at the absurdity of trying to find common ground. The elderly woman danced with and their wings created patterns in the air that looked almost like joy. Your 72 hours end tomorrow, the arbiter said finally. The tribunal expects your answer. I know, said, and they'll get one, but first they get tonight. First, they get to see what they're really asking us to give up. The arbiter left, but not before pausing at the doorway. Behind them, they could hear the music, the laughter, the sound of beings from across the galaxy learning to be together in ways that had nothing to do with treaties or trade or carefully maintained diplomatic distance. For the first time in their long existence, Chief Arbiter wondered if maybe the tribunal had made a mistake. The party ended at dawn station time. Representatives stumbled back to their quarters, exhausted and confused, and somehow lighter than they'd been before. The Queen refused to return to her ship, claiming she needed to process unexpected data. The commander found himself unable to stop looking at a child's drawing. The scientist locked himself in his quarters and cried for 3 hours straight, grieving for every moment of beauty his species had sacrificed in the name of efficiency. Returned to his quarters and slept for 4 hours. When he woke, he had 1 day left before the tribunal's deadline. 1 day to prepare his answer. 1 day to decide humanity's fate. He spent it writing, not speeches or arguments or legal defenses, just a simple message to Earth explaining what had happened and what came next. He told them about the verdict, about the choice, about the party and what it had meant. At the end, he wrote, "They're afraid of us because we remind them of what they've lost. They've built a civilization on stability and logic and control, and we're chaos. But maybe that's what the galaxy needs. Maybe they've been stable for so long that they've forgotten how to grow." He sent the message, knowing he might never see the response. The tribunal reconvened at midnight, exactly 72 hours after the verdict. The chamber was different. Noticed it immediately as he entered. Representatives sat in new configurations, species that never interacted now clustered together, talking in low voices. The Queen had brought 7 members of her brood, young queens who shouldn't have been at such a formal proceeding. The commander kept touching his uniform, an anxious gesture that his species didn't make. Something had changed. Chief Arbiter called the session to order. The chamber quieted, but it wasn't the cold silence of before. It felt warmer somehow, despite being the same sterile space. "We reconvene to hear humanity's response," the Arbiter said. "Ambassador, you have had 72 hours to consult with your government. What is your answer? Will humanity accept emotional suppression therapy, or will you accept permanent quarantine?" Stood, but before he could open his mouth, the Queen rose from her section. "I move to reconsider the verdict," she said. The chamber erupted. The arbiter's wire-frame body flickered with what might have been surprise. "This is unprecedented. The tribunal has rendered its judgment." "Then the tribunal should render it again," the Queen said. "Because I have had time to process what happened at the human gathering and I have reached a conclusion. I was wrong." The High Commander stood. "I second the motion to reconsider." Now the chamber was in chaos. The scientists stood. The merchant. The being. One by one, representatives who had against humanity rose to their feet, their appendages, their energy fields. "Order," the Arbiter commanded. "What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning," the Queen said, is that we judged humanity based on fear. We called their emotions weapons because they changed us. But change is not attack. Growth is not warfare. We condemned them for making us feel without asking why we had stopped feeling in the first place. The commander stepped forward. I spent 1 hour with a human child yesterday. She gave me a picture, just a picture drawn in colored wax on paper. It showed me smiling. My species eliminated smiles. We removed joy, sorrow, fear, everything that might interfere with perfect logic. And in 1 hour, that child made me realize what we had become. We are not logical. We are empty. There is a difference. The scientist's voice trembled. I cried yesterday, 4 times. Each time felt like dying and being reborn. I cried for the art we never made, the love we never felt, the connections we never formed. We called it efficiency. We called it progress. But it was just fear. Fear of being hurt, so we eliminated the capacity to hurt. And in doing so, we eliminated the capacity for everything else. The chamber descended into argument. Some species defended the original verdict, insisting that unpredictable elements had to be controlled. Others spoke of the party, of moments they couldn't explain but couldn't dismiss. The debate raged for an hour, then 2. Finally, a small voice cut through the noise. A junior representative from the Delphini, a mollusk-like species that rarely spoke in tribunal sessions, rose from their tank. "I have a question," the Delphini said. "If human emotions are weapons, what does that make the isolation, suppression, and fear we have used to keep our civilization stable for?" The chamber fell silent. "We have eliminated war," the Delphini continued. "We have achieved peace through emotional suppression, through genetic modification, through careful control of every variable that might lead to conflict. But we have also eliminated art, music, love, grief, hope, and connection. We have created a galaxy of beings who exist beside each other but never with each other. If that is not a weapon, then what is it?" Chief Arbiter stood motionless at the center of the chamber. Their wire-frame body hummed with processing, running through millions of scenarios and precedents. Finally, they spoke. "The Tribunal recognizes the motion to reconsider. We will vote on whether to overturn the previous verdict. Representatives, indicate your position." The vote took 30 minutes. When it finished, the arbiter announced the result. By a vote of 631 to 216, the previous verdict is overturned. Felt his knees weaken. Around him, he could hear gasps, cheers, and what might have been sobs from species that didn't have tear ducts. "However," the arbiter continued, "the question remains. What is the appropriate classification for human emotional capacity? It is clear that it has significant effect on other species. It is clear that it spreads through contact. It is clear that it causes fundamental changes in exposed populations. But if it is not a weapon, what is it?" The merchant stood. "I propose we classify it as a catalyst-grade cultural resource." "Explain," the arbiter said. "A catalyst causes change but is not itself consumed in the process. Human emotions cause change in others, but the humans remain emotional. They are not diminished by sharing what they feel. If anything, they seem to grow stronger through connection. And the changes they cause are not destruction. They are transformation, awakening, a return to something we had lost." The debate began again, but this time it was different. Species were not arguing about danger. They were arguing about classification, about implementation, about how to safely integrate something that had terrified them only days before. After another hour, Chief Arbiter called for a final vote. The tribunal proposes the following. Human emotions are reclassified as catalyst-grade cultural resources, requiring careful, voluntary integration into galactic society. Humanity will establish embassies of connection, places where species can experience human emotional culture in controlled environments and choose whether to incorporate these practices into their own societies. All participation is voluntary for both humans and aliens. Do the representatives approve? The vote was 783 to 64 in favor. stood in his circle, barely able to process what had just happened. They had done it. Somehow, impossibly, they had done it. "Ambassador," the Arbiter said, "does humanity accept this classification and responsibility?" Opened his mouth, then closed it. He thought about Sarah making the queen cry, about the artist who about the child who drew a picture of a smile, about the grandmother who taught aliens to dance, about all the messy, complicated, beautiful humans who felt things deeply and weren't afraid to share it. "I accept," he said, "on one condition." The chamber tensed, the Arbiter's body hummed. "State your condition." "The program must be voluntary in both directions. Humans won't impose their emotions on anyone, but we also won't suppress them to make others comfortable. Some species will never understand us, and that's okay. But for those who want to try, the door is open. We'll meet you halfway, but you have to choose to walk through." The Arbiter considered this. "Acceptable, the condition is approved." As the session ended and representatives began to file out, many of them stopped by circle. The Queen touched his hand with one claw, a gesture of respect in her species. The commander showed him the child's drawing, now carefully preserved in a protective case. The scientist simply nodded, tears still fresh on his face. The merchant approached last. "Thank you," they said, "for teaching us to dance." Smiled, "Thank you for being willing to learn." 5 years later, the galaxy was a different place. The change hadn't been sudden or dramatic. It crept slowly through space lanes and trade routes, carried by beings who had visited the human embassies and brought back stories of what they'd found. 3 species experienced what historians called civil, as emotional suppression became politically unpopular and genetic modifications were reversed. 12 new art forms emerged from human-alien collaboration, creating music and visual expressions that neither species could have made alone. 2 wars were prevented through what military strategists awkwardly named aggressive empathy tactics, where human diplomats simply refused to let opposing sides avoid feeling the consequences of their choices. Not every species embraced the change. Some closed their borders to human influence entirely, preferring stability to uncertainty. Some tried to integrate emotions and failed, their societies fracturing under the weight of feelings they didn't know how to process. It was messy and complicated and sometimes painful. But slowly, carefully, the galaxy was learning to feel again. On 7, in the main plaza where species from across the stars came to conduct their neutral business, a new statue stood. It showed a human child offering a drawing to an alien judge, frozen in a moment of connection that had changed everything. The plaque beneath it was written in 847 languages, each translation slightly different but carrying the same essential truth. On this station, the Cosmic Tribunal learned that the most dangerous thing about human emotions was not their power. It was how desperately the galaxy had needed them all along. Stood before the statue sometimes, when he visited the station for diplomatic functions. He was older now, his hair gray, his face lined with years of navigating the delicate balance between species that felt and species that were learning to feel. The child from the party found him there once, no longer a child but a young woman studying. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Throwing that party, taking the risk?" Looked up at the statue, at the bronze child offering her simple gift. "Every day, I'm terrified we'll break something we can't fix, that we'll hurt someone with our emotions instead of helping them, that we'll prove the tribunal right and emotions really are too dangerous for civilization. But then I remember the Queen crying for the first time in her life, the commander wanting to be the person in your drawing, the scientist discovering grief, and I think maybe danger isn't the worst thing in the galaxy. Maybe the worst thing is safety that costs you your soul." The young woman smiled. "That's very human of you." "Thank you," said. "I think that's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." They stood together in silence, watching species from across the galaxy pass by the statue. Some stopped to read the plaque. Some touched it reverently. Some simply looked and moved on, unchanged and uninterested. And that was okay too, because humanity had learned something in those 5 years, something that the Tribunal's verdict had almost taken from them. Connection couldn't be forced. Growth couldn't be mandated. Love and grief and joy and sorrow had to be chosen, freely and knowingly, or they meant nothing at all. The galaxy was learning to feel, not all at once, not perfectly, but slowly, one connection at a time. The cold dark of space was growing a little warmer. And somewhere in that vast expanse, a human grandmother was teaching aliens to dance, and a veteran was sharing his scars, and an artist was painting grief, and a child was drawing smiles. The human problem had become the human gift, and the galaxy, for all its fear and resistance and desperate clinging to control, was beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, it had needed humanity all along.